Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining me. This is the show where we do our best to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stolnicker, and really excited to have on a wonderful guest today. My guest is Dr. Aaron Rock. Dr. Rock is the pastor at Harvest Bible Church in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. He has a podcast, very active in explaining, providing perspective on so many of the events that took place with Canadian churches during the pandemic. And man, just you'll hear this in the interview. He tells the story, and it's unbelievable. And he mentions this. He said it's a little bit like looking back on a dream or waking up from a dream. You can't believe it's real, that it happened, but it certainly did. And there are so many lessons to be learned. Dr. Rock's podcast is on leadership. And so we talk within the context of what took place there on leadership lessons. And how do you lead through something like that? How do you lead your church through lockdowns and through tyranny and all of the things that happen there? How do you lead that? How do you lead your family? How do you lead government officials and interact with police officers and government officials? How do you do all of that? Such an important conversation. We have talked on this show before about what took place there and understanding what happened there. But I so appreciate this conversation because it's certainly about what happened, but more than that, how do you make decisions? How do you carry forward? How do you bring other people forward? How do you explain why you're doing what you're doing? Fantastic conversation, very instructive, very helpful, and I know that it will be an encouragement to you. My guest today is Dr. Aaron Rock. Dr. Rock, thank you for joining me. Really appreciate your time.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you very much for having a Canadian on your show. It's my honor.
We've had quite a few on recently. I don't know what's happening. I need to talk to our bookers and start getting some local folks. But yeah, man, it's great to be able to talk to you. There's so much we've discussed on this show. A lot of what has happened and did happen in Canada. I know even some movement has taken place in the last week or so in regards to some of the folks that got caught up in that, but particularly the church. And this is an interesting conversation. And I've been asked, why do you talk about this so much, and why have you spent so much time even dealing with this? And we're going to broaden out a little bit today, but this is a really important study for everyone, but certainly people in the U.S., we went through our own kind of machinations, right, of whether we're going to stay in church or not, and what that's going to look like, and how much power the government has over the local church, and what we should do. And what we saw, I think, in Canada was kind of the extreme of that. If the government gets absolute power and can do what they want to do, and people don't push back, then this is what that looks like. And so this is a really, really important conversation. I just mentioned I talked to Jeremy Bundy a few weeks ago, who did a documentary on exactly this and trying to understand it. So I appreciate you coming on, and I want to talk about some of that. But before we do that, let's get into your background and your faith story and really how God brought you to where you are right now.
Yeah, happy to share that. And again, thanks for standing with us and being an encouragement. I know a lot of the Americans have been a real encouragement to the Canadian church during all of this. So yeah, my name's Aaron Rock. I've been married for 28 years to Susie. We have 5 adult children between the age of 18 and 25. 4 of them are married. They're all living for the Lord, and we're super thankful that the Lord has given us 2 grandbabies already.
Wow.
Which is super awesome.
Yeah, wow.
Within 6 months. So we had 1 born last December and 1 in June. I've pastored in this church for 22 years. I was the church planter here in Windsor, Ontario, which, just to orient my American friends, is a border city to Detroit, Michigan. So we're just across the river from Detroit, yeah. The southernmost big city in Canada. I came to faith in Jesus Christ when I was a child through kind of a hardcore gospel preaching service that I attended. I came home, felt very convicted of my sins, felt very lost. By God's grace, my mother helped me to understand the need to repent and trust in Christ, and I did that. And when I've described that story to people, I say it felt like I was in a dark room and someone turned the light on. And of course, I would see that as the doctrine of regeneration happening in my life. So my parents later split up, unfortunately, and we were raised in kind of an impoverished situation, a bit of a chaotic home. But through a series of influences, basically godly Christian men in the churches I attended, I stayed true to my faith. I felt in grade 12 the Lord had called me into Christian ministry, so I was originally going to go into plumbing, actually, and be a tradesman, but I ended up knocking off 4 different degrees, and I never thought I would enjoy any of that, but it was a blast. So then pastored for 8 years as an associate and youth pastor in a couple churches here in Ontario, and then ultimately planted this church in 2001. Before church planting was cool.
Right. Right.
Back then it's like, oh, you're planting because you can't find a church. No, I just want to win
funny.
people to Christ. So so our church has grown. It's a pretty sizable church now, and we've planted a couple other churches out of ours, and we have a staff, I think, of 28 people.
Wow.
Serving in our Christian school and our church ministries. And I have a podcast called Leadership Now, where I deal with various ethical, theological leadership issues. So I'm happy to come on and share any meager insights I might have with you.
My dad started a church, or my mom and dad started a church. I guess we all did. I was just a little kid, so I didn't have a choice in the matter. But back in 1987, and you mentioned that it was before church planting was cool. Man, that was a crazy time, right? That was not the time where you had associations sending out church planters. You didn't have, there was no support. It was like you go to a town, you work a job, and you did it. It's so funny. I talk to church planters now, and I'm grateful for all of them, and I'm really thankful for where we've come to, right? Where we take that on as a kind of a corporate responsibility. But
yes, for sure.
Man, it would have changed things when I was a kid. That's for sure. Canada is an interesting, to me. I've been to Canada. I enjoy it. It's beautiful. The people are great. Politically, you mentioned this before we came on, maybe similar to what I've experienced here in California, but much more draconian in the application of that politics or those politics. A lot of folks are familiar with what happened during the pandemic in Canada, but can you talk specifically about you and your church and what you guys worked through there? Because again, this is really important. I don't know that we had a one time where churches have to figure out if they're going to stay open or not situation. I would anticipate in the next few years, we may be confronted with that again.
Right.
And you lived through this, you worked through this. Can you talk about that? And then, talk about kind of the thought process that you went through to make the decisions that you did.
Yeah, so we went into lockdown in March of 2020, and when it all happened, it was this surreal. It would be like saying the Germans are sending their bombers over California tomorrow, and you'd be like, "What?" Like I didn't even think that would ever happen. So
right.
We were told these lockdowns were going to happen for a few weeks. We jumped on our live stream and did Zoom church, which I've since repented of. And after a few weeks, I just started feeling very uncomfortable with what was going on. 2 weeks turned into 4 to 6. We were totally locked down. We were allowed to have 5 people in church, just enough to sort of record a service. So I wrote a letter to the Ontario government. In Canada, all our 10 provinces and 3 territories, they all had their own health mandates. So what happened in Alberta wasn't the same as Ontario, et cetera. So we had these lockdowns going on, and I'd written a letter to our premier. And before I sent it, my letter essentially said, if you don't open us by June, I'm opening my church anyway, in a more gracious way. Before I sent that, I was talking to my elders, and we thought if we could get maybe 20 or 30 other churches to sign this, it would just look better and go further. We ultimately had 445 churches and 2 synagogues in our province sign that letter. That got us an audience with the Premier's office, the Attorney General and whatnot, and we essentially threatened him in a meeting that if he doesn't open our churches by Monday, that we would go to court. So on Monday, he stood up and he opened our churches, and we were delighted by that. So we got our churches opened back up in the summer of 2020, and we were coming into the fall, and we started to hear rumors of another lockdown. And then, lo and behold, in December, they put us into our second lockdown, which we really didn't anticipate. So we resisted that. We sort of had enough. We'd seen all the jet-setting politicians taking off to their cottage, violating the rules, attending weddings. But the the serfs weren't allowed to do that. So we decided on principle to resist that. And what happened was on December the 20th of 2020, the infamous date in my mind, burned in my mind, I was charged for opening my church under lockdowns. And I think it's accurate to say there were a couple churches in BC that collectively might have received some tickets prior to me, but I think I was the first individual, the first pastor in the country to be charged under the Ontario Reopening Act. At the time, it was shocking. It was kind of like national news. And then very quickly, it became almost a household, a daily household conversation where we were hearing Mike Thiessen gets charged, this pastor gets charged. Out in Alberta, they went full draconian. James Coates was tossed in jail. Art Pawlowski was arrested. Tim Stevens was thrown in jail. And the state just went full tyranny. And this then led for me to a series of 6 charges, 2 at the church, 4 for speaking at protests in the community. And so at one point, I think I was facing potentially 6 years in prison and $600,000 in fines. By God's grace, as of this year, those have all been withdrawn or stayed. So I'm not going to jail, at least not for the time being. But during all of that, Jeremy, I think one of the things that was going on in my mind a lot is I was thinking a lot about Romans 13 and the authority of the state over the church, which I reject, and really was able to fine-tune my understanding of sphere sovereignty and authority, the authority of Christ over his church, Christ over the nations. And as a result of that, just to make a long story short, we saw exponential growth in our church. A few hundred people left, and hundreds more came, and our baptistry's been full. We baptized, I think, 88 people last year. We'll probably baptize 100 or more, maybe 120 this year. So we've had several hundred people over the last few years come to faith in Jesus Christ and be blessed by that. And it's simply served to galvanize our faith and lead many people to Christ. So we know the devil always overplays his hand. And that's what happened in this situation as well.
Hey, Situation Report, Jeremy Stolniker here. We've all heard about DC politicians and their incredibly well-timed stock trades. Well, according to veteran trader Ross Givens with Traders Agency, it's all true. These politicians have made absolute fortunes for themselves trading stocks. Ross has revealed there's a largely unknown legal loophole that allows regular people, patriots like you and me, to see when these elite insiders are buying up stocks and how to follow their lead to incredible profit opportunities. Now, Ross has been doing this for a long time. He's a former vice president of investment management at JP Morgan Chase. He's been trading stocks for almost 20 years and teaching clients how to trade their own money for almost a decade. And we've just been blown away by everything Ross has revealed, including exactly what this trading loophole is and how it works, how he's learned from these insiders for nearly a decade, and how the stock picks have gained 88% in 7 days, 234% in 8 weeks, and even 1,787% in 2 years. Go to theinsidertrades.com to start following these insiders yourself and get a free stock pick of one of the hottest symbols that is seeing huge insider buying right now. That website is theinsidertrades.com to see when these political insiders are buying stocks and get your free stock pick. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. When I think of Canada, I don't think of tyranny and draconian measures. I do now, but I didn't before this. Is this something that was completely unexpected, out of left field, or was this something that as a Canadian living in Canada, you kind of went, yeah, we knew this could eventually happen?
No, I got to admit I was very surprised. Obviously, we all come from multiple family lines, but my first Canadian ancestor came to Quebec in around 1660.
Wow.
So my family's been in Canada before it was Canada for hundreds of years. And pretty much all my family lines have been here for at least 3 and some up to 10 or 11 generations. My grandfathers fought in World War I, World War II. We were sort of patriots. You know, Canada we thought was the best country in the world. When I was a kid, we prayed the Lord's Prayer in school. I remember my grade 5 teacher read us the Bible in a public school. We always felt that the country was moving away from Christ, but there were still vestiges of Christian influence that were appreciated and celebrated.
Yeah.
But I would say in the last 20 years or so, it's really turned into a very atheistic, very secularized, very statist country, and in a shocking way.
Yeah.
And then when the Trudeau government came into power about 8 or 10 years ago, things just went into high gear in terms of statist influence, totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Taxes are through the roof, carbon taxes. During the pandemic, he passed a series of what I would call antichrist laws. One of the infamous ones was a conversion therapy bill, which is actually being suggested in our neighboring state in Michigan. The governor there wants to pass a conversion therapy bill. And the conversion therapy bill is based upon the false premise that people are somehow torturing homosexuals and forcing them to become heterosexual based on that false premise.
Yeah.
Every single member of our federal parliament, I think there's 338 of them or thereabouts, either voted in favor of this bill across party lines or didn't vote. Not one single member of parliament in any party, not the socialists, not the liberals, not the Greens, not the conservatives voted against this bill. And the thing about this bill is in its preamble, it states that heterosexual normalcy is a myth, which is essentially saying that the creational account where God made us male and female is a myth.
Yeah.
So this is a direct assault upon not only science, but it's also a direct assault upon the Word of God. They then went on to pass the MAID bill, medical assistance in dying. So now if you're depressed, you can just go get a shot and be put to death in our country. Abortion is rampant. I know in the US, we were so thankful that Roe v. Wade was overturned. But the interesting thing about the US is they always had some laws in place, some checks and balances. We have none. We have no abortion laws. Last year, I believe it was, a 9-month-old baby, perfectly healthy, at the last minute when the mother was about to deliver him, she decided, I don't want him. They aborted him full term and then pulled him from his mother's womb.
Wow.
For no reason.
Yeah.
She just decided she didn't want him.
Yeah.
So we live in a culture of death. We live in a culture of state tyranny. The government is increasingly surveilling the population. We have censorship laws whereby we can't even post Canadian news articles anymore on Facebook, or they're just rejected. And when I tell people these stories, I had an opportunity to speak at a conference in Georgia recently, and I was telling some of my American brothers and sisters about the things that were taking place in Canada, and I almost felt as I was listening to myself speak that I was lying. Because I get shocked when I think about the stuff we've gone through. And I get shocked when I reminisce on the things we've experienced over the past year. It almost feels like I just woke up from a dream.
Yeah, sure.
But what I hope our experience and our ongoing experiences serve to do is to galvanize Christians in other Western countries, like the UK, like the USA, to say, look, you may be 5 or 10 years behind Canada in terms of the tyranny, but it's coming your way.
Sure.
It's hijacking our electoral system. Elections Canada just came out with a post this week stating they're going to start celebrating the LGBTQ plus agenda. This is an election body, a body that oversees the veracity of our elections, that's gone full political. The military, I have a friend who's a major in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he met with me some months ago, and he says, I don't even know if I'm going to make it through to retirement. I was forbidden from wearing my uniform on Canada Day.
Right.
Because it's controversial. I was forbidden from flying the flag. I was ordered not to fly the flag on Canada Day. The military's gone woke. The police offer almost no protection from the tyranny of the state. The hospitals are full woke. You go to the Windsor Hospital here, the gay flag's up, the Ukrainian flag's up. All public institutions, universities, banks have been hijacked by wokeism, or what we would call antichrist ideologies. So it's probably worse than most people think. At the same time, on a day-to-day basis, we still are able to get up and go to work and worship and feed our families.
Yeah.
So we're not experiencing what they experienced during the Holocaust by any stretch, but things are increasingly moving towards globalism, statist, totalitarianism. Taxes are through the roof, and on and on and on and on. I could go on and on and on talking about the challenges that we're experiencing, but I want to end with this. God is on the move.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful for it. Many have been woken from their slumber. The wheat has been separated from the chaff. And we've had story after story of people who otherwise would not have donned the doorstep of a church. They're now here worshiping with us as fully devoted followers of the Lord Jesus Christ.
Man, it's so interesting on so many fronts to hear you talk about that. Thinking about our country, I'm 46 years old. And when I look back, even just over my lifetime, to think that we would be where we are right now it's unthinkable. You talk about waking from a dream, man. I was talking to my wife this morning about some of what happened in the last couple of years, but the talk around what might happen in the next couple of months or whatever. And it's like you're living in an alternate universe of some kind. It just doesn't make any sense. But here we are, and it is interesting, or it has been interesting to see people who are so desperate for hope and so desperate for truth, maybe lulled into a sense of security, because it wasn't security, but a sense of security before all of this, have now finally looked up and said, I need answers. We've seen that in our church here in California. I mean, you mentioned go to an online service for a couple of weeks. We did that for a little while. No one knew anything, and it was just a weird time, and whatever. We all know that. But after a couple of weeks, it's like, yeah, this isn't going to end. So coming back to church, and so many churches in our local area staying shut for months, some more than a year. And those folks who attended those churches coming to our church because they were looking for a place to worship. But then even other folks, like you mentioned, who never been to church, didn't care about church, would have even rejected the idea of going to church, are so desperate for truth. And it really has been an awakening. And man, such an interesting time. I think historically we understand that when there's been persecution, when there's been trial, that's when the church has done its best. And certainly in the United States, I think we have been at this, it's okay to be a Christian, even that it's popular in some places to be a Christian, and that's changing. And I think it's changing for the good. What are some lessons that you took away? You have a leadership podcast. You talk about leadership, Right on Leadership. As a church leader leading through this, so, I think in these rings, right, you're leading yourself first of all, but leading your family through this, I have to believe that this, that was a challenging time, and it is a challenging time leading your family through that, and then leading your church through that. You have staff that you have to lead through that, and I've been in church work a long time. I know there are wonderful people that work on church staffs, but that doesn't mean they all agree necessarily on what should happen. I'd love to get your perspective on how you lead through that, or maybe even some lessons you've learned looking back on that, things you should have done, or whatever.
Well, I think there's several things that come to mind. One of them is that I'm glad this happened at the age that I'm at now. So I turned 50 this year, so I was dealing with this, I guess, when I was 47 or something like that. And I'm grateful that the Lord had already given me 27 years at the time of pastoral ministry experience. I started pastoring when I was 20. I'm not sure I would have known how to handle it when I was 25 or 35. So I'm grateful that, I've been able to draw upon a lot of experience, and I've always felt pretty comfortable and competent exegeting the scriptures and counseling people and administering the affairs of the church. And that's where it starts, right? You have to know how to handle God's word. You have to know how to think through the issues. And then you're applying them to the crises in the moment. And the crises that we experienced was unprecedented. I'd never experienced something like that. I had not anticipated going through something like that. But I did have that bedrock foundation, high view of Scripture, the ability to study the Word of God. So what I did, and I would do this again if we experienced another crisis of a different ilk, is I decided, I need time to think through this. So I did a 6-week maybe it was 5 weeks, but I think it was 6, a 6-week online course while we were all under lockdown. I decided I'm going to come to the church and I'm going to teach my people, I'm going to invite them all online. I'm going to teach my people to think through all the issues that were flooding into my thinking at the time. So we talked about Levitical health laws. What does the Bible say about quarantine laws? What does the Bible say about medical choices? What does the Bible say about resurrection hope? What does the Bible say about the role of the state? We studied Romans 13. We studied Acts chapter 5. We went through all of these issues. So I did about 10 hours or 12 hours of teaching to my church.
Wow.
And so what happened for us is at the end of that, and again, this is when we were trying to negotiate with the province to reopen our churches, is coming out of that, we actually had a very, very high percentage of unity when it all of our elders were in lockstep. Our staff at the time were all in lockstep. Now, 4 of my elders ultimately moved to the U.S. So I do miss those guys, but we did not have friction or division at that time on our choice to push back against the state. So I would say one of the keys to leadership is you need to think through the issues yourself first. You be clear-minded. What's right? What's wrong? What are my responsibilities? What is the relationship of government to state? Where do we work collaboratively with the state? Where can we say to the state, buzz off, you have no authority here.
Right.
Thinking through those issues, I had to think through that in my own mind, so I was clear-minded. And once I locked down, once I sort of drove those stakes into the ground, and I said, okay, these are my boundaries. These are the lines I'm not going to cross. Then it was, full throttle forward. And I think the church, people aren't looking for arrogant leaders, but they are looking for confident leaders. And because I was confident in my assessment of these things and in my view, I think we were able to move the church forward in a more unified way than perhaps we otherwise would have been. So taking time to teach your people is really important, and teaching flows out of your own encounters with the Lord. A lot of logistical stuff. So one of the criticisms I sometimes have of churches is that they're not very organized. You get good men that are preaching, they love Christ, you get good leadership teams, but they have no strategy. And I'm a bit of a strategist. I guess you kind of have to be that way to be a church planter. I like to think through structures, what structures work, what structures don't, what are the chains of command, who's who in the zoo, who answers to who, these sorts of things. And we've always, I think, organized our church fairly well, but now we had to create a whole new structure. So there was a period of time when we were driven out of our church facility, and we had to divide up our congregation into 18 small congregations.
Wow. And
put them under the authority of an elder or a trusted man in our church. And you can read between the lines, because I still am followed by law enforcement, I think here and there, paid attention to. We may or may not have met in undisclosed locations for an extended period of time under lockdowns. And as a result of that, I think our people were really galvanized in their faith. One person told me later, they said, one of the most precious memories I have during lockdowns, may or may not have been, meeting in the upper story of a barn with animals making noises underneath me. I never thought I would be secretly meeting in a barn under lockdown in the country of Canada under police surveillance. That location was later surveilled by the police for, I think, 4 Sundays, so it had to be abandoned. And people had to go elsewhere. We had police at our church, I think, for probably 20 Sundays in a row. And in all of that, though, I think people realize, as much as we appreciate the public nature of the church, we do want to be public. We'd rather be public than underground. At the same time, God's people can worship in barns. God's people can worship in basements. God's people can worship in sheds. God's people can worship in warehouses, and they should, and they're called to do that. So we had to do a lot of organizing. We already had some infrastructure in place, and we had to integrate 500 people into small groups. So because they were new to the church in 1 week. We had to reorganize our church into 18 sub-congregations. We had to find locations for them to meet. And one of the, I guess, advantages that we had in all of that is I had a mentor say to me many years ago, no matter what size your church is, you should always act bigger than you are. You should always structure yourself bigger than you are. You should always have more leaders than you need, so that if you experience exponential growth. So we went from a church of like 1,800 to close to 1,600 at one point. When you experience exponential growth, you're ready for it. So being organized and having a plan. So at this point, I would say, like, if you have any sense that there may be further lockdowns, state surveillance, or legal challenges associated with your ministry, make contingency plans now. I believe I read in your bio that you're a former soldier. Is that correct?
I was in the Marine Corps. Yeah, Marine. Yeah.
So, as a soldier, when you go into the arena of battle, you have a plan.
Right.
But I would imagine you also have several contingencies.
Right.
Okay, we're going to go this way, but if for some reason we come under enemy fire, we have an alternative plan. And some of those plans need to be made on the fly, but there's a general sense in which this is the direction we're going to go. But we also have lots of off-ramps that will take us back onto the highway if we need to. And I think it's wise for church leaders to start to think about that now. What if suddenly, because of government censorship, you can't be online anymore? What if you can't meet in public buildings anymore? What if there's surveillance taking place within your congregations as there was in ours? Having contingency plans in place aren't a reflection of someone who's living in fear, but they're a reflection of someone who's being wise and prudent and shrewd.
Yeah.
Because we have a very real enemy that is out to get us. One interesting thing that happened in our church is we had a conference here. This would have actually just been last December. So after the lockdowns, and we discovered that one of our a CBC journalist actually attended that conference and took notes and had a secret recorder and interviewed our people and whatnot. And it was kind of offensive when I heard that initially. And then I thought, you know what? Why should I expect different?
Yeah.
So we just expect that. When we're doing ministry, we pay attention to, we assume we're being watched.
Yeah.
We assume we're being listened to. We assume that our words could incriminate us, but at the same time, we don't live with a sense of fear, but rather we want to be bold and we want to push back against our enemy and let them know that we have strength that comes from the Lord.
On MyPillow's 20-year anniversary, with over 80 million MyPillows sold, Mike Lindell at MyPillow wants to thank each and every one of you by giving you the lowest price in history on their MyPillows. You will receive a queen-size MyPillow for $19.98. Regular price is $69.98, and just $10 more for a king size. You will receive deep discounts on all MyPillow products, such as bed sheets, mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, and so much more. This is the time to try out some of their other amazing products you've had your eye on. Go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code SITREP to receive this amazing offer on the queen size MyPillow for $19.98. Or call 800-870-0283. This offer comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's time to start getting the quality sleep you deserve. Go to mypillow.com and use promo code SITREP or call 800-870-0283. Were you still online when you were broken up into those 18 groups and meeting in places like the barn? Did you still have an online presence?
Yeah, so what we did in that circumstance is I would record a sermon every week, and then depending on the venues that people were in, they would watch it. And then I would go so on a given weekend, we kind of had people meeting at different times.
Sure.
What I would do is I would try to hit at least 3 of those weekend services and preach live.
Yeah.
And then the next weekend I'd preach live in three of the other flocks. and that worked out quite well for us. But we felt it was important to have. I'm not the only preacher in the church, but I am the lead pastor and I do the bulk of the preaching. So we felt it was important during times of duress for the people to see my face and to hear my voice. And obviously I was preaching a lot of sermons that related specifically to the events of the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you help your family through this?
Well, it was hard. So my one son had already married and was living a few hours away and was part of a church that didn't take the view that we did. So I think he found himself in a bit of an awkward situation, and him and I had to have gracious chats about that for about a year.
Wow.
And he's on board with our position, but I think for a period of time he wasn't. The kids that were living closer to us or in our home, they were all on board. Even at the Ambassador Bridge protest, 2 of my sons were down there ready to be arrested, for standing up for freedom. Young men, it's interesting. Young men like to fight. I remember when I was younger, even really not that long ago, karate, like to get into wrestling matches and whatnot. There's this sense of, bring it on. I want to go to war.
Right.
And my sons are in that age, they were late teens, early 20s. That we're going to go to war. We're going to defend our country. But at the same time, you need some gray hairs on the scene, sort of tempering the enthusiasm and providing some strategy. So I was delighted to see people of all ages participate in protests, show up to church. You probably heard of the infamous Ottawa convoy.
Yes.
I was there. I was there twice, sharing the gospel, ministering to people. Young people showed up. So our family was on board in all of that. My wife was on board. I didn't waver, but I said to my wife one time, and my wife's a very sweet, gracious personality. She comes from a Mennonite background, which historically, they were pacifists and, peacemakers. And she still has some of that in her. And I said to her, Susie, what would you do if I decided to just close the church or not say anything? She said, I would have been so mad at you.
She was going to go to war with you.
So that was just another affirmation. She was totally on board, and we obviously processed things and chatted about things along the way. The only time when our leaders disagreed were on very minute details. So for example, there was a time when I was charged and the police came to me, and they were always very apologetic. Oh, we're so sorry, Mr. Rock. We're so sorry you're being charged. I hope you win in court. We'll charge you.
Yeah.
But they would charge me, and then they would maybe call and say, are you going to meet this Sunday? And I said, well, you're going to have to wait and see. And they would say, well, I just want to warn you, if you meet, there's going to be something big that would happen. And so I would talk to law enforcement connections, because I do have several law enforcement connections through my personal relationships in the life of the church. And I would call friends that are in law enforcement. I would say, what do you think they're going to do? And there was a time when I was pretty sure they were going to do a big takedown. They were going to arrest a bunch of our people or charge all of our people. And I didn't want that, because all the charges that I received were in my name, not on the church and not against our elders. And I just thought, I don't want to just cast our pearls before swine.
Sure.
So we decided to meet elsewhere. And, a couple of our younger elders, again, military age, would you just go back in, get through the windows at night? And we went back and forth on it, and for various reasons decided that we shouldn't. And then at a later date, a couple of those younger men said to me it was the right idea. It was the right decision. So just on the level of raw strategy, there was sometimes some differences of opinion. But not a single elder. At the time, I think we had 12 elders in the church. Not a single elder went sideways. People in our church legitimately had different views on vaccinations, for example, or mask wearing in malls or public places. But in terms of the church's asserting that Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone has authority over the ministry and worship of the Christian church, none of our men blinked on that.
One question I haven't asked of a pastor, but I'll ask you, because you mentioned law enforcement. My son is a police officer in our community, and he and I have had this conversation a few times. You need to think now about what you're going to do, right? If you're ever asked to do some of the things we've seen other law enforcement do, you need to think through that. How did you as a pastor, lead through that when these law enforcement folks come to you and say, hey, we hope you win or whatever? Good people, they're worried about their family and their livelihood and those things as well. They're put in a very bad situation. They make decisions that we would disagree with, perhaps. How did you work through that? Because you're in the community, you're the pastor, and you're pastor in the community. We hope to get to the other side of this. You still want to pastor those folks later on as well. How did you navigate that?
I've always got along really well with law enforcement. I'm not sure if it's my personality or not, but I've always connected with cops. And so I have good relationships with the 6 or 7 or 8 cops that go to our church.
Yeah.
So I would consult them, especially some of the more senior guys, on these decisions. And, they would sometimes give me good warnings or good insight. They pretty much all affirmed that the police departments in our nation have been influenced by the woke agenda.
Yeah.
And that is a factor. I was always very gracious, whether I wasn't, I was never rude to the police. I was not calling them pigs or anything like that.
Yeah.
There was a point, I will admit, when I was yelling. The day after the Ambassador Bridge arrests, I went down there after church and I saw hundreds and hundreds of cops beating up and throwing around about 20 or 30 protesters. I couldn't believe it. I got up on a snowdrift and I said, I'm disgusted by you.
Yeah.
This is inappropriate.
Yeah.
Inappropriate. And later, one of the detectives called me who had spoken with me previously. And he's like, oh, yeah, Mr. Rock, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I said, no, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
I'm very angry at you.
Yeah.
I'm very angry at your behavior. You show up at one point, you show up with a line of a couple hundred cops it was very early in the morning. There was maybe 30 protesters there, and you've never even come up and had a conversation with these people.
Yeah.
Like, you look like goons.
Yeah.
So there was a couple times when I had bold words with police when I saw them picking on other people. But in terms of my personal interaction, one of the cool things that happened is the first officer that charged me, a police sergeant, very big man. I'll never forget this. When he came into the church to charge me, he was actually physically shaking.
Wow.
And very apologetic. I ended up speaking with him, I believe, 7 times after that.
Wow.
I call him and he said to me at one point, you know what? I want to thank you, and my wife wants to thank you personally for treating me so graciously.
Wow.
And so I've bumped into him since, and I'm praying that he might come to faith in Jesus Christ. He's fed up with what's going on in the police services. He was doing his job. I don't agree with it. I think he should have said, I'm not doing it.
Yep.
But he was doing his job. And I think that the police that have met me personally respect me. Those that may just have read about me in the news, probably think I'm some Looney Tune. But the guys that I've actually interacted with one-on-one respect me. But unfortunately, many of the senior veteran police officers are filing for early retirement, or they're bailing out. They've just had enough.
Yep.
We have a unique situation in our family where my daughter-in-law, who's a seminary grad, is now a cop. She's a police officer.
Wow.
And I think she actually is going to be a very, very good detective one day. I mean, I think she'd be the ideal person for helping women who maybe have been victims of sexual assault or sex trafficking, but she's got to do 3 or 4 years on the beat, right? And it's going to be hard for that generation of officers to deal with the wokeism, riding around in cruisers with gay flags plastered all over them, basically vilifying pastors or people in the community that stand for traditional values. So I think when we're dealing with law enforcement and we're dealing with politicians, our response needs to be measured against the actions of that specific person. So if a person is beating someone up on the street or roughing up a bunch of protesters, I'm not going to go up to them and say, excuse me,
Of course.
do you mind if I share Jesus with you? Like, I'm
Yeah.
going to express myself vehemently.
Yeah.
But if a person shows up and says, hey, Aaron, I got this ticket for you, I kind of feel bad for you, I hope you win in court, I'm not going to barf on the guy.
Right.
I'm going to have an intelligent conversation. I'm going to express my concerns. And I would say that principle applies to politicians as well. The reason why I don't have any respect for our prime minister is because he's a certifiable tyrant.
Right.
And he has passed laws that have led to the ending of babies' lives, disabled people's lives, and depressed people's lives. But if I meet a politician that's maybe not a Christian, who's buying into some of this antichrist ideology, but almost out of ignorance, I'm gonna be much more gracious in my interaction with such a person. So
that's good.
I think Christians throughout the centuries who've experienced tyranny probably did the same. If there's, after World War I, we tried and we executed the leaders of concentration camps. But some 18-year-old private that was conscripted into the German army, we just said, get your backpack and go home.
Sure.
So we vary our responses depending on the level of evil and the level of responsibility the person has for what's going on in the situation we find ourselves in.
That's good. That's very, very helpful. There's more we could discuss, but where can people follow you? You've got a podcast on the Fight, Laugh, Feast network. Where can people get a hold of all of that?
I do, yeah. So on the Fight, Laugh, Feast network, my podcast is called Leadership Now. It's 2 words, with Dr. Aaron Rock. And you got to kind of add that because I've since discovered there's another podcast out there called Leadership Now. Else. I also have a personal website, pursuitofglory.ca, which has some articles and podcasts on it. Our website is harvestwindsor.ca. I'm fairly active on Twitter, at Dr. Aaron Rock, and I'm also on Facebook, so people want to follow or friend request, they're welcome to do that. I'm not the kind of guy that's looking to be in the limelight at all.
Right.
I would just as soon fade into the woodwork and live in obscurity. I've had enough drama in my life to last a lifetime. But I do feel a certain responsibility to influence and bless the next generation.
Yeah.
And if any of my teaching or comments or insights would be a blessing to others, I'd be happy to make the connection and build the relationship.
That's great. Dr. Aaron Rock, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Great conversation. Very helpful. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We were not made to live in isolation. Sadly, many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day.
A lot of guys end up drinking, a lot of guys end up losing hope. Someone will go to the VA and they'll try to get, prescription medications to help with PTSD. They'll get pills for anxiety, they'll get pills because they can't sleep, now they'll get pills for depression before they know it. They're taking 12 different medications. And when it's not working out, these guys lose hope, and that's why there's 23 guys a day committing suicide.
The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. As a result, we've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live.
Everything they said just kept hitting me in the heart over and over and over again. It's like all the things that I didn't know that I needed to hear. And I opened my heart to God that week, dude, and I've been a different person ever since.
Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. We provide our programs and resources, including travel, at no cost to our warriors.
I remember talking to a licensed social worker who actually handed me a pamphlet to Mighty Oaks. So I went. And I'm glad I did.
By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Our mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find new life purpose through hope in Christ. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. Hey, Situation Report, Jeremy Stolniker here. We've all heard about DC politicians and their incredibly well-timed stock trades. Well, according to veteran trader Ross Givens with Traders Agency, it's all true. These politicians have made absolute fortunes for themselves trading stocks. Ross has revealed there's a largely unknown legal loophole that allows regular people, patriots like you and me, to see when these elite insiders are buying up stocks and how to follow their lead to incredible profit opportunities. Now, Ross has been doing this for a long time. He's a former vice president of investment management at JP Morgan Chase. He's been trading stocks for almost 20 years and teaching clients how to trade their own money for almost a decade. And we've just been blown away by everything Ross has revealed, including exactly what this trading loophole is and how it works, how he's learned from these insiders for nearly a decade, and how the stock picks have gained 88% in 7 days, 234% in 8 weeks, and even 1,787% in 2 years. Go to theinsidertrades.com to start following these insiders yourself and get a free stock pick of one of the hottest symbols that is seeing huge insider buying right now. That website is theinsidertrades.com to see when these political insiders are buying stocks and get your free stock pick. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. I appreciate Dr. Rock and that conversation. Please go and check out his webpage that he mentioned. Listen to his podcast on the Fight, Laugh, Feast Network. You can also learn more about the work that they have done and the work that he is doing as he communicates really to help other people know how to navigate these issues and issues like this. And I like to believe, and I think we all like to believe, that what happened during the pandemic was a one-off thing. I think we're going to have to make decisions about church and about what we believe and how we're going to stand up and how we're going to push back. We will have other opportunities. It's good to make those decisions now. Appreciate that conversation. If you're not yet subscribed to the podcast, I was going to say podcasted to the subscribe. That's not how it works. If you're not yet subscribed to the podcast, please do that. We'd love to have you subscribe. That lets us produce more content like this. It's very helpful for us to know that you are subscribed. You can also go to our website, thesitrep.org. This episode, other episodes are archived there as well, and we'd love to share those with you. Thank you again for joining us. Look forward to talking to you next time.